What is a mortuary-hilted broadsword? Well, it's one of these. Let's talk about it. So I'm here at Olympia Auctions in London, and they've got a sale coming up on the 26th of June, and I'm having a look at some of the amazing things in it. And one of the things that I have just pulled off the wall is this incredible English mortuary-hilted broadsword. Now, this is a particularly English style of sword. The particulars of the details of the hilt, which we'll look at in a second, are absolutely English, and this is completely associated with the English Civil War in most people's minds because it was the type of sword. Oliver Cromwell had one. A lot of the cavalry on both sides in the English Civil War would have carried these. So really, this is a type of sword that is around from about 1630 to about 1660. They were still around. So this middle section of the 1600s, of the 17th century. Now, when I talk about the 1600s, a lot of you will think about rapiers, like there are some nice examples of behind me here. And indeed, the rapier was the predominant gentleman's sword for wearing about town. And yes, they were also carried in war. Don't think of them only as a civilian sword. Lots of people did carry rapiers in war as well. And there are military forms of rapier. However, in England, if you know the writings of George Silver, you know there was a degree of resistance to the rapier. The rapier was seen as something foreign, something imported from Italy or Spain or France. This was often the weapon of foreign duelists, and there was a resistance to them, both in terms of dueling. So initially, up until about the 1580s, 1590s, a lot of Englishmen preferred to use a backsword or a broadsword instead of a rapier. And George Silver, writing in 1599, was one of these such people. So it was seen as the traditional English weapon was a broadsword or a backsword. In other words, a basket-hilted cut and thrust sword, but predominantly a cutting sword. And this kind of feeling, this national sense of, pride in the national sort of martial culture continued up until and beyond the English Civil War, such that rapiers and thrusting swords don't seem to have been particularly trusted in war. So very often someone like Cromwell might wear a rapier in civilian life, but carry a broadsword or backsword in military life. And so he is, in fact, shown with both, and it's known that he owned both. So what we have here is a mortuary-hilted sword. So this is the type of sword that an English, specifically English officer would have carried at the time of the English Civil War. And in fact, for all we know, this could have been carried in the English Civil War. We can't say it was, but it could have been. It's certainly a type of sword that was extensively used at that time, mostly by cavalry, it has to be said, so mostly by people on horseback, but not only, also used on foot as well. So the officers of pike or musket also often would have had these, although there was some tendency, it seems, for rapiers to be slightly more common amongst foot soldiers and broadswords and backswords to be slightly more common amongst mounted soldiers. Anyway, nevertheless, why is this called a mortuary-hilted sword? Well, this is a modern term, but fundamentally it is because of a funny detail of the hilt. Now, first of all, this is an iron or steel hilt, beautifully made, incised work, made with filing and chiseling and engraving. A lot of hard work. You can't cast this. This is just a lot of hard work, working, first of all, shaping a sheet of iron and then piercing holes in it and then filing all the holes until you end up with this beautiful decoration. Dozens and dozens of hours of work have gone into creating this. And you see it's got attached bars. The bars which come down the side provide more protection on the inside and outside lines of the hand. They join, so you've got the frontal knucklebow and the side bars. Characteristically, mortuary hilts pretty much always have 3 bars, 1 at the front, 2 at the sides, that join at 90-degree intersections to each other. And they join the pommel via screws. That again is a typically English feature. If you look at Scottish basket-hilted broadswords, incidentally, they tend to join in other ways. They tend to join with a ring underneath the pommel, so they have a different joining method. So this is, while not unique to English swords, this is very much characteristic of English mortuary-hilted swords. So screwing directly into the pommel, and this is a very ornate pommel. Some of them are quite simple, but this is very ornate. And then 3 bars coming up, extra swept bars here to give a little bit more. In fact, some mortuary hilts actually have 2 bars at the side here rather than just 1. So this just has 1, but it's fairly low down. And then you always have this large shell at the top, which is a little bit like a cup hilt that's been a bit flattened. Now, the reason it's called a mortuary hilt is, can you see there is a face and another face and another face and another face there. So these faces are supposedly in memory of Charles I and his wife, I believe. However, the problem with that is that some of these seem to predate their Charles I's execution. So there's a little bit of a problem with the timeline. So actually, I'm not entirely sure who those relate to. If you know more information about this, if you've got your own theories, get posting down below, because I'd be very interested to hear that. But nevertheless, this is why they came to be known as mortuary hilted swords, because those are supposed to be the faces of dead or otherwise persecuted people. Who knows? They are, these hilts also have 2 other peculiar features which are almost unique to them. One is the reverse quillon, instead of being an actual bar or hook that comes up, is a long straight bar, like a roll, like a scroll at the back, and that is very characteristic of them. That's the first thing. The second thing which is very characteristic about them is inside the hilt, you'll see you've got the pommel and you've got the grip and you've got the basket, but in between the grip and the basket you have this. And in basket hilts, that is quite an unusual thing, and it's a bit like a quillon bar. It's like a little crossguard that goes inside the basket. Now what's interesting is that is very functional because it reinforces this sheet of steel and prevents the blade from forcing its way through that sheet of steel. In other words, there's a sandwich between the blade shoulders and that bar, and with the sheet in the middle. So in other words, it makes the basket much stronger and more durable. So it's really nice. I really like it as a design feature. It feels quite nice in the hand. It helps with the edge alignment, but it also especially when you don't have a crossguard anymore, because there's no crossguard you can feel the edge with. So being able to feel that bar is a bit like having a crossguard inside the basket, but also it increases the lifespan of the basket in use. Right, finally the blade. So this has a average size, average proportioned, double-edged blade with triple fillers. So it's got a main central filler with 2 thin fillers either side and some writing in the blade, which probably marks it out as a German import blade, but I'm not certain. This is a light blade, quite flexible, lots of distal taper, very light and nimble in the hand. This, to be honest, this feels in the hand very, very similar to a Victorian officer's sword, such as a rifle officer's sword or an infantry officer's sword. It doesn't feel big, it doesn't feel heavy, but it's got a good amount of hand protection. One final thing to mention as well is when you're handling the originals of these, you'll notice that the baskets are relatively thin. And when we look at modern replicas, particularly ones used for fencing or reenactment or things like that, usually the baskets are made thicker and therefore heavier for reasons of durability. The originals tend to be thinner and therefore the whole sword tends to be lighter. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed seeing an original English sword of the English Civil War period, in this case the mortuary hilted broadsword, double-edged sword. Absolutely gorgeous example. This is number 162 in the catalogue, lot 162. And thanks again to Olympia Auctions for having me over here, and I hope you've enjoyed seeing these wonderful things. See you soon. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.